In today's video, we have lots of things to discuss. It's been a very busy NHL news cycle day. We're going to talk a little bit further on the offer sheets from the St. Louis Blues to the two Edmonton Oilers RFAs. Plus, we had another trade today between the Penguins and the Predators. We'll discuss that. Plus, we have some other news around the NHL, including an update on the 2018 World Junior Case that's going on in London, Ontario, and a couple of interesting rumors. Could there possibly be a scenario where John Tavares reunites with his old team, the New York Islanders? We'll discuss that possibility. Could Chris Letang end up in Montreal? There's some speculation that he may have asked for a trade. We'll discuss all of what we know coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, it's been a very interesting NHL news day. One of the more interesting days we've had here in the dog days of summer recently. Of course, it's, when you get to August and even late July, sometimes the news slows down and it can be a bit of a challenge to find interesting topics to talk about, but they made it easy on us today. Of course, the day started off with a couple of offer sheets signed, which is rare. We've only gotten, besides the Montreal, Carolina back and forth stuff here in recent years, it's pretty rare that you get these. So to get the St. Louis Blues to attack the Edmonton Oilers and sign their two lone restricted free agents that are unsigned to this point, Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, both agreed to offer sheets with the Blues. Of course, we did learn a little bit more details on that, which we'll talk about here in a second, but just in case you missed it, I do have dedicated video on the offer sheets and the trade between Pittsburgh and Nashville, so I'm touching them quickly here. If you haven't had a chance or if you want more of an in-depth analysis, check out those other videos here when you're done with this one. But the Blues signed Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, both to 2-year contracts. Broberg's is just over $4.5 million, and Holloway's $2.29 million. So the Oilers now have 7 days to match to retain those services. If they don't match, you can get a second-round pick for Broberg and a third-round pick for Holloway. The Blues were very strategic with those amounts. They went $1 shy of having to go to the next tier of compensation. So they were very deliberate, aggressive, strategic. This was a well-calculated move. Of course, earlier in the day, we saw a trade between St. Louis and Pittsburgh to get one of their draft picks back, because you have to have the draft pick compensation. It has to be your own picks. It can't be picks of other teams that you acquired, and they didn't have one of those picks, which I believe was the second rounder that they get back. So they had to do a swap with Pittsburgh, because that pick of theirs ended up getting moved a couple of different times and made its way back to them. So that people saw that trade first and wondered, oh, this is a boring deal. What is going on with this? This is an odd trade. And then not long after, boom, you get the offer sheets. And it all kind of made more sense. So, yeah. So now the more interesting part of that we've heard since then is Oilers reporter Bob Stauffer on his Oilers Now podcast earlier today, after this news broke, was saying that he has information to suggest that Oilers management, which would be, obviously would have fallen upon Ken Holland being the responsible party and general manager, being the head of that, department, was instructed by Oilers ownership and the higher ups here. And you can probably throw Jeff Jackson in there, because he would have been the CEO at the time, right around the time of December, January, mostly in January, to get, they wanted these deals done. They were instructed, or Holland was, and the management team, get these guys signed. Because at that point in the year, they were both in the minors. Now, of course, teams, you can say what you want. Teams have to be businesslike, and they have to take advantage of situations to get the best deal possible. And those were times when players are either injured or having a difficult time, end up being demoted to the minors. Those are the times when you want to consider extending them if you still believe in them long term, because their value's down. So you're not going to get as good of the player's not going to get as good of a contract. But when they're struggling, they might be like, well, you know what? I could really use the job security here, so I'm going to take it, right? It's just all about that give and take. Do you bet on yourself? Do you take the offer? Anyway, so they were instructed to get this done, and they didn't. And now here we are. Obviously, as the season went on, their value got better. Their value to the team down the stretch and in the playoffs, obviously, were good contributors, so their value got better. And this is why they're able to get these contracts. So there's no doubt here these are overpayments for both of these players. There's no way anybody can say they're fair today. But if you're going to be successful, you have to overpay. And you have to think from St. Louis' perspective as well that there's going to be a subsequent move if they're successful because they have a lot of defensemen. Now, the Torrey Krug situation is kind of, interesting. We don't know for sure, but it's possible that Krug may not play this year. We know he's dealing with something serious. So, take him out of the lineup. That still gives him, I think, 7 defensemen already before Broberg. The Blues have $7.3 million in space, so they have enough room. It works out to be just a little shy of $7 million between the two contracts if the Oilers do decide not to match. So we'll see. But interesting to hear the update there from Bob Stauffer. Obviously, Holland's not with the team anymore. You have to think they're pretty frustrated with the fact that these were not done, and now they're in this predicament. Of course, like I said, we also had a trade today between Pittsburgh and Nashville, with Cody Glass getting traded from Nashville alone, 2 draft picks to Pittsburgh for a prospect that's played a couple of years in the East Coast League. Ultimately, this is a cap dump, $2.5 million for Cody Glass. Has 1 year left, I think, in Pittsburgh. He'll get a decent opportunity to play in the top 9. A lot of people that watch this player a lot. I mean, I've seen Glass a fair bit over his career, but not as much as some. Like I remember, I got to watch him a fair bit when he was in junior. Obviously, I watched him play on Team Canada, but then of course, playing in the Western Conference, I'm on the East Coast, so I don't see as much Western Conference hockey as I'd like, just because of the time difference. It can be really tough staying up super late sometimes to watch some of these Western teams. I do try my best to do it on occasion, but it's hard to do it all the time. So some of the people that have watched him closer say that he still has lots in the tank. He has lots to give, and they feel he should be a winger on more of a full-time basis than a center, but that he can definitely play and contribute. And like I said, it's low risk. He's a former high pick that hasn't quite hit his stride in the NHL. I think it's a good move by Kyle Dubas, and you get a couple draft picks to boot, and you had the space to take it on. So I like that move, and obviously we'll see how things work out there. Other news around the league today, we did get news, which pretty important news out of the around the Rangers. Sam Rosen, of course, long time play-by-play person working with the MSG Network, announced today that the 24-25 season is going to be his last. Of course, yesterday was his birthday. He turned 77 years old. He's been calling games for MSG for 40 years. So Sam Rosen will be done after this year. It's going to be interesting. Of course, it's a very well-known, important, common voice that anybody around hockey knows. It'd be kind of weird not having him around, but understandable given where he's at in his life. I think he's deserved and earned a chance to have a break and to enjoy retirement a little bit more. So Sam Rosen will be done after this year. A couple of quick signings. Colin White, the former first rounder of the Ottawa Senators, who has had a tough time the last couple of years. He went from having one good year in Ottawa to getting a 6-year extension to getting bought out 2 years later. And part of that, he dealt with a pretty major shoulder injury. Then he's bounced around from a few teams. Ended up in Florida on a 1-year deal. After that, then he didn't get re-signed there. Didn't do the greatest. Then he ended up in Pittsburgh on a PTO. Got a contract. Went pointless in a bunch of games. Ended up on waivers. Landed at Montreal last year. Got a bunch of games there at the end of the year. Still remained pointless. So he had no points last year. He ends up signing with the Sharks organization, but it's only an American Hockey League deal. Man, has everything fallen for Colin White. I feel terrible for him. He had so much potential. I remember especially watching him for the Team USA in the World Juniors right after he was drafted. He looked amazing. I thought he was going to be a heck of a player for Ottawa. They had a lot of high hopes. He was going to be ideally a second liner, but at the very least a third liner that was going to be a real solid two-way play with a good offensive output. And he looked like he had good potential there. And it just never came together. That injury, though, that he had after the one decent year he had, I think really impacted him since then. It could play a big role. I mean, you see it all the time. Sometimes players can bounce back and not miss a beat from a big injury, and sometimes it just takes a lot out of them and they're just not the same player. So I'm glad to see Colin White continue his career, but he's just one of those guys. He's just such a likable player. I know from his time in Ottawa, the Ottawa players absolutely love this guy and cheered so hard for him, hoping he would, find his game and get it together. He's just a real comical guy, I guess. It's just like some guys you can just tell they're just real good dudes, and you just can't help but cheer for them. And he's one of those guys for me. So Colin White staying in hockey, but AHL deal. Of course, the Sharks will have an opportunity if he plays well to change that and sign him to an NHL two-way contract later in the year if things work out. So hopefully he can get his game together and at least kind of climb his way back up. Also, we got a signing in Dallas. The Dallas Stars have signed goalie Magnus Helleberg. Of course, he's bounced around a lot from his time in the NHL. He gets a 1-year two-way contract as well. And of course, the other day we talked about some speculation of former first overall pick of the Edmonton Oilers and what many people consider to be one of the biggest draft busts in NHL history, Nail Yakupov, at 30 years of age, maybe making an NHL return or attempting to, trying to get a PTO. That's not happening. Now we can confirm 100% that he is staying in Russia. Well, he's actually not staying in Russia, technically. He's staying in the KHL, but he's signing with the Kunlun Red Star team, which is the team that's based out of China. So yeah, he's changing teams. He got a 1-year deal, and that has been officially announced. But yeah, I do wonder if maybe he was kind of weighing his options and trying to see what he could get for an NHL opportunity. That part probably was true, but he's decided to sign over there, taking more of the guaranteed option, I guess, which is probably a good choice for him. We did get some other updates and some movement on the 2018 World Junior Sexual Assault case that's before the courts right now. Of course, 5, we can call them former NHL players now, are awaiting trial. Today was another hearing, and there was some big information that came out of today's hearing. We knew that there was a possibility of getting a trial date, and we did learn some information about that. Of course, TSN's investigative reporter Rick Westhead been all over this from the beginning. His updates today indicated that the 2018 World Junior case could start April 21st, 2025. So that's not too bad for timing, considering how the Canadian judicial system works. But it is possible that it may not be April 21st. Of course, that's assuming that all of the pretrial motions are all sorted out and done with by then. But if they're not, and they're not ready to start, then it's likely going to get delayed as far back as September. And that's mainly because of all the people involved with the trial. You've got the lawyers for both sides, you get the judge, you got witnesses, and all the court, staffers and all that. Like, there's lots of people that have to be available, that are assigned to this. So it's not the easiest thing to kind of, push it back. It can take a while before everything lines up that everybody involved can be there. So April 21st, 2025 is what they're aiming for, but it's possible that we could see a delay, and if we do, it's going to be September. The trial is expected to last approximately 8 weeks. So if it goes in April, you're looking at probably somewhere around the end of June. It would be when we would get the verdict, most likely. And if it ends up going into September, then you're looking at probably sometime in November. So it kind of depends. Of course, as we know, like I said, those 5 players, none of them are NHL affiliated anymore. They all, of course, 4 of them were at the time when the charges were first dropped, and of course players were taking leave of absences from their NHL clubs for personal reasons or different. In Dylan Dubé's case, it was called for mental health purposes, which is kind of weird now that we don't know everything that we do. But at the same time, none of those players were qualified. None of them have anything NHL contracts. In terms of National Hockey League, they're all considered unrestricted free agents. So Alex Formanton had already been out of the league a couple of years, and then you got Foote, McLeod, Dubé, and Hart are all UFAs now. And Dubé and McLeod have contracts in the KHL. I know Carter Hart was rumored to be looking at one, but I don't believe he actually ended up signing, but Dubé and McLeod did. So, yeah. So they will be able to play until their trial, and we'll go from there. So that's a pretty big update. So we'll mark our calendars for April. I don't know if we'll hear a whole lot about this case between now and then. There's bound to be some pretrial motions that we may get updates on here and there, but that's the big part of it for now. As I mentioned, a couple of articles which I will pin down below. That's some interesting stuff here today. Of course, as we know, yesterday we got word that the Toronto Maple Leafs are set to announce Austin Matthews to be the next captain in team history, essentially stripping John Tavares of the captaincy. Now, I've seen a lot of people either make videos, write articles, post about this on social media. Everybody's got their own spin on it, and a lot of people are calling John Tavares being stripped of the captaincy. Now, I don't see the Leafs spinning it that way at all. They won't have their press conference until around, I think it's tomorrow morning around 11 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, 11 Eastern, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that's the time. So by lunchtime tomorrow, we'll have a chance to have this officially announced, and we'll get commentary from the Leafs. I assume that we'll probably hear, obviously, from Matthews himself, from Trey Living, maybe Shanahan. I don't know if he'll be there. And then I kind of wonder if Tavares will be there too. They made it sound like John Tavares has been involved in the process and very much on board with it. But really, what choice do you have? And a lot of people are spinning this in different ways and saying, you know what, like regardless of what you think, at the end of the day, he was stripped of the captaincy. It's very unlikely that he went to management and said, hey, how about I'm not the captain anymore? You know what I mean? He's a proud player. He works hard. You can say what you want about him. Maybe he's not the best captain. Maybe he's not the best player. But you know what? At the end of the day, John Tavares is a really hard worker and, has given everything that he could to that team. His intentions were good, and that's that, right? I mean, it didn't work out. It's just that simple. They brought him in on a huge UFA contract, leaving the Islanders, and they were hoping to get a Stanley Cup or a lot more playoff success, and it just hasn't worked, which is leading to this change. I really firmly believe that if this team had more playoff success in the past few years, this probably wouldn't be happening. They'd probably be waiting for his contract to expire before they made the change. But at the end of the day, no matter what, he is being stripped of the captaincy. I think that's fair to say, but I'm sure that the way the Leafs are going to spin it here is that he's involved with it and that he's okay with it and he supports it, and we're not going to be led to think anything otherwise based on their commentary. But there's an article at the Eyes on Isle site, of course, which covers the New York Islanders. And this article discusses the possibility of a reunion with their former captain, which I thought was I never thought in a million years that anybody would broach this subject, let alone ever to being possible to happen. So essentially, their take on this situation is that with John Tavares losing the captaincy, they feel like the Leafs have no choice but to trade him, which I don't agree with. I think they have a lot of choice. Now, I've seen some people say and reference scenarios where a captaincy like that was changed and the player was still part of the organization, and it was really awkward and it was weird and it had negative impacts. And we've seen times where it's had positive impacts. So I don't know how this is going to go. John Tavares has a full no-move clause, and the only way the Leafs are going to be able to move him, he has to be completely on board with that too, and I'm not sure that he will be. But the article goes on to say that they feel like that the Leafs don't have a choice, that Tavares should be moved, that it's going to complicate things in the team in the room, I guess, with him being there. And they think that the Islanders could take advantage of that and bring him back home. They obviously feel like he would waive to go back to the Islanders. Now, could that be weird? Sure, it could be. I don't know how the fans would feel about it. There's some fans that were dead set against hating on this guy since he's left, and he still gets booed to this day when he goes back to Long Island for a game. To come crawling back to the Islanders, I don't know that he would ever do that, to be completely honest. But their rationale here is that the Islanders could use some more depth down the middle. They could use the experience and production that Tavares is still given, and they suggested a trade where the Leafs retain some salary to knock it down to a more reasonable level and trade him straight up for Jean-Gabriel Pageau. It also talked about maybe trading him for some younger pieces that would help Toronto. Maybe they throw in like Oliver Wahlstrom, Simon Holmstrom, some other pieces like that. I'm like, okay, maybe the Leafs would probably want something younger. That would kind of make sense, I guess, if they do this. But yeah, then they talk about the idea of Jean-Gabriel Pageau going straight up. Considering Pageau's a much cheaper player, he's different kind of player. Gives them a different mix, gives them a little bit of flexibility cap-wise. But if you realize that the Leafs have to eat money on Tavares, and then they take back a $5 million player, they're not really getting much cap relief. So, Jean-Gabriel Pageau has always been a player that I've really liked, but he's not anything like John Tavares. I don't like that deal at all for Toronto, and there's no way they would ever do that. Would Lou Muriel and the Islanders consider bringing Tavares back if the Leafs, if there was a serious scenario where the Leafs were going to trade Tavares, would they want to talk to him about coming back? Maybe, I guess. But does it make sense? The Islanders are already an older team that need to get younger and more skilled. Tavares is a good player still, but they've been a lot better of a team since he's left. I just don't think it makes any sense. But I thought it was an interesting read to get their take on it. I wanted to get everybody else's take. I'll link the article down below. Is there any way this makes sense to you? Let me know in the comments. The other article here is some comments from Pittsburgh media. Mark Madden. Apparently he says in his latest that Chris Letang had asked to be traded to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, of course, Letang knows Kent Hughes very well. Letang was a client of his when he was an agent before he became the GM of the Montreal Canadiens. So was Patrice Bergeron. They were two of his more prominent clients during that time of his career. But so obviously there's a connection there. And I know there was a lot of people talking about Letang and Bergeron. Of course, Bergeron's retired now, joining the Habs when Hughes was first named GM of the Habs a couple of years ago. Of course, that's never came to be. We've never really seen a scenario like that unfold. But with Letang having multiple years on his contract at a fairly high AAV for a defenseman of his age and whatnot, it certainly would not be an easy deal. It would be complicated. But he says that the Habs and the Penguins had discussions at Letang's request about trading Letang to the Montreal Canadiens, but unfortunately the deal never really got worked out, never came together. So I find that interesting that Letang wants to go to Montreal. Now, for him to consider finishing in his career, there's not shocking. He's from Quebec. He knows the GM well. Maybe it's important to him, just like, is it more important to go back to Quebec and play in your home province than to be a lifelong Penguin? Maybe. I don't know how he feels about it. I guess I can see the connection there. But it would be complicated for Montreal. I mean, they're not going to probably want to take Letang on while they have a bunch of other, defensemen there that are veterans. So, if they move David Savard, which is possible this year, that maybe they consider that if Pittsburgh were to eat some money on Letang. I guess that's a possibility. I would imagine they'd expect Pittsburgh to maybe take a contract back that they're not real fond of too. Maybe a Josh Anderson or something like that. I don't know if I'm just kind of spitballing here. I just, from a cap perspective, maybe something like that could be worked out. I don't know. Obviously, he didn't get too far. All he says was that they had discussions at Letang's request about wanting to go to Montreal, but it never worked out. We don't know how far they got. But you got to wonder, though, if there's anything to this. And then in the last couple of days, we've had the Malkin rumors about playing one more year and going to the KHL. What's Sidney Crosby thinking about all this? I mean, Sid, I'm sure, has pretty honest, frank conversations with his buddies there in Pittsburgh. If they're seriously considering wanting out or moving on, after what he lobbied to get them extended, is that part of why Sidney Crosby has not signed yet? Is he having doubts? It kind of just makes me wonder. I mean, I can't say with any certainty that Crosby is having second thoughts about re-signing in Pittsburgh. I can't say that with any certainty. I have no information to suggest that. But, it's just weird that we're getting all these rumors popping up here in the last week about Letang and then Malkin. And, the whole point was for those three guys to kind of ride out the remaining years of their career together. And maybe now Letang and Malkin are having second thoughts. I don't know. They're probably recognizing that the Penguins aren't as good as they used to be and that maybe it's just not in the cards to be able to win again. It might be challenging enough to even be a playoff team. So I don't know. It just makes me wonder if that's part of the holdup, and if Crosby is having any second thoughts. I mean, like, that's just me wondering out loud. So what do you think? Is Crosby having any second thoughts? Or is there anything to these rumors about Letang and Malkin? And is it impacting Crosby's decision? Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.